Doctor, you just retired from your dental practice 2 years ago, but you've been very busy.
I have, and I got involved with HERC because I have a story to tell. And even though those of you who know me know that I'm very shy and I'm very hesitant to speak publicly, but I've learned that that's the only way to reach the certain people that I need to reach. So I've been talking to 7th and 8th graders, some adults, about the Holocaust, my experiences. I'm not teaching the Holocaust. I'm not able to do that. But I can tell them what I went through, what my family, my immediate family went through, and some of my experiences that have taken over my life. And it's a good feeling. At the end of the sessions, they're usually about an hour long. At the end of the sessions, kids come up to me and they hug me and they put their arms around me and they want to take pictures. And that's a good feeling. I know I've done something worthwhile, and that's why I'm doing it.
Children want to hug you.
Yes, that's not a bad thing.
Certainly not. And I know as a healer, you certainly welcome that. But why do they want to hug you after your presentation?
You know, they feel very close to me. After what I tell them I went through, they're so appreciative that I come to see them and to explain my story to them. And they feel good about it. And the teachers will say, the kids want to hug you, is that okay? And I said, sure, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. But I guess that's the answer.
I know you take a lot of questions from children during your presentation, Doctor. What's the most thought-provoking question that has come out of the mouth of a child when you are recalling history?
How do you feel about what you went through? And do you have anything that you can tell us that would help us if we ever had to go through anything like this again, themselves? And I tell them that, and they also say, do you forgive them? Are you at a point in life where you can say, these people were terrible, they caused me and my parents and my grandparents and aunts and uncles and other family members a great deal of pain and suffering. But I read a book by Elie Wiesel, and he explains it quite well. He says, you can't forget what happened to you, but you have to learn to forgive. And over a period of time, I think I've learned to forgive. And whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. It's made me able to live with myself.
It took over a period of time.
Absolutely.
When did you know you were making that turn in your forgiveness?
When we came back from Germany, we went to Germany about 6-7 years ago and spent about 2 weeks with my family. My sister, who's no longer living, had 2 boys. One is a doctor in Efrat, Israel. And we went back to Germany, and we saw the house where I was born, where the Nazis took us away from. It's still standing in Karlsruhe. We went to cemeteries. We saw a lot of cemeteries of aunts and uncles and cousins that were buried there, some before the war and some after the war. And so we made it, I didn't want to go on this trip. I fought, and I said to Michael, Michael, I've never wanted to go back to Germany. He says, this is really important. It'll give you a closure. And I said, well, if we do it together, I'll do it. So we did. we went there. We had a guide for about 10 days who followed us around, and we rented a bus that we used to get around. And we came back from that trip, and I felt as though I needed to reach out and start talking about my experiences to people who are just reading history books but have never had anything, thank goodness, have never had anything to deal with like that.
Sharing your story, sharing that chapter of history has helped your forgiveness.
Yes.
That's remarkable.
Yes.
The first 9 years of your life, Doctor, reads like a Hollywood script. Take us back to 1938. Before that, I know that a lot of your memory is a combination of what you remember as a child and the meticulous diary that your older sister Lori kept during the ordeal itself. But 1938, a year after you were born, your grandfather's store was destroyed.
My grandfather had a kosher meat market in our building. We lived in the 3-story building in Karlsruhe on a part commercial, part residential street. And November 9th, 1938 was the night of Kristallnacht in Karlsruhe. And that was the night that our synagogue was burned down, our scrolls were burnt and destroyed. My grandfather's kosher meat market was ransacked, destroyed. It was a turning point if you were a Jew living in Germany at that time, if you haven't left yet, and you couldn't leave. That was the problem. The Germans didn't want you as Jews. They want to get rid of all the Jews, but they wouldn't let you leave either. They wouldn't give you the visas that you needed. They had a numbering system over there, which was posted every week in newspapers. And if your number was called in that list of numbers for that week, then you could apply for a visa and you could get a visa and leave. Problem was there was no place to go. No one was accepting Jews except for China. My aunt, who raised us here in Milwaukee, was my mother's sister, and she was 10 years younger than my mother. And she had a number that came up in 1937. And she decided to leave on her own. She had a sponsor, a cousin in Staten Island, New York, who sponsored her. She came to New York. Her aunt wouldn't sponsor her fiance in Germany. So she went to work, cleaning houses, doing whatever she had to do to make some money, saved her money. She lived with her aunt, and she sponsored her fiance. He came here about 6 months later, and they got married, and eventually wound up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And that was your Aunt Trudy?
That was my Aunt Trudy.
But take us now, pick up the story now, if you would, Doctor. Suddenly it's an August morning in 1940, and authorities are gathering outside. You're 3 years of age. Authorities are gathering outside your front door for about an hour?
They were out there. My sister was vacuuming the floor. Again, my sister was 8 years older than I was. So that was the big, she was my mother-to-be.
Yeah.
Once we left my parents. And she raised me and took care of me and with love and care, and she was the best person that's ever came into my life, with the exception of my wife, I think. No, but she was really, she was a very giving person and all that. But getting back to that morning, there were some policemen outside with clipboards and rang the doorbell, and my father came to the door, and they said, is this, give me your name, and he said, Siegfried Richheimer, and give me the name of the rest of the family. And they checked them off, my sister, my mother, and myself. They said, you have 15 minutes to gather a few things that you want to take along. You're going to be transported to a nicer place.
15 minutes to collect
15
all the possessions you own.
15 minutes.
Do you, at this point, you're 3 years of age, do you have any images? Do you have any
No.
memory? Okay.
That I do not remember. That was, I'm taking that out of a diary that my sister wrote when we entered Switzerland.
And now you're heading to the train depot.
Yes. So no, first they walked us over to a school that my sister used to go to school. And then they had army trucks there. They put us on army trucks, took us to the train station. We waited there about 5-6 hours. And this is maybe 1,000 people, maybe 2,000 people. I don't remember anymore. And my sister didn't mention that either, but there were a lot of people. And when the train came, it wasn't a regular train. It was a cattle car train. And if you know what cattle cars are, they're like box cars, and they have slots cut in the sides of the cars so that when they transport animals, they get air in them so that they don't suffocate and die. So they pushed us into these cattle cars, body to body, no place to sit, just stand. They put 2 pails in, one on each side of the door. They closed the door and they locked it. So we were not able to escape. And eventually the train started moving. We were on this train for 3 days and 2 nights.
Oh my God.
And a lot of people died on the train. Elderly people died on the train that couldn't stand. They had heart problems. They had medical problems. They didn't have medications. They this and that. So all of that. Each day the train stopped twice. Usually in the morning, they would let us out on the side of the tracks, and the guards were all around us. We couldn't run away. And they would give us a cup of water and a piece of dry bread.
That was it?
That was it. And then they put us back onto the cattle cars, and then we went until late afternoon, and then they stopped and did the same thing again. On the second day of that trip, they didn't allow the men to go back on board the cattle cars. They made an announcement, all the men stay back, women and children can go back on this train. So we were, of course, very worried about my father, who was not on the train anymore. And the train started rolling, and we eventually got to a concentration camp called Gurs, G-U-R-S. And we pulled in to the railroad tracks extended into the camp, so that when you left the railroad cars, you were inside the camp already. So they didn't have to worry about running after you and so forth. The height of this barbed wire enclosure that they had was like 10 feet high, and it was electrified fence. So anybody that touched it would have been electrocuted. And they told us about that. And when we got off the train, we noticed that there was another train that followed us, which we weren't aware of. My father and my grandfather and other men were on this second train. They had some tables set up. The Gestapo had some tables set up in the front of the train. And they told us to get out and to form 3 lines. The first line was for women and children. The second line was for, and there were soldiers that guided these people into these various lines. The second line was for people that were younger and were able to work and were of value to the Germans. And the third line was for elderly men just elderly men. We didn't know what was happening, but they told us then the first line, they took our line and took us into a large building. They made a strip of all of our clothes. They cut off all of our hair. They sprayed some white powder on our bodies to prevent probably infections or contractual diseases and so forth. And And then they give us like pajamas, a top and the bottom. There was white and black stripes, and those of you who have seen the freeing of the camps later on probably saw these skin and bone people still who survived, dressed in these type of garments. They were not very warm. The barracks that we were in, now this is only for my mother, my sister, and myself. My father was in the second line. He was taken to another part of the camp where the men were stayed. We didn't know anything about him. We didn't know what was happening with him. We never saw him again. My mother never saw him or spoke to him again. The children were able to see their fathers once every few months. They would let us go there for a couple of hours, supervised. And so if my mother wanted to say something to my father, it would come to my sister. And if my father wanted to say something to my mother, it would come to my sister also, and back to my mother. So my mother never saw her husband again, or my father, since he was not able to get onto that train before we reached Gurs.
Wow.
During all the 3 years that we were in those two camps, there was another camp that we went to. They always transported the men on separate trains with the women and the children on separate trains.
Did you ever learn what the purpose of that was, Doctor?
No.
Ultimately, you were transferred to another camp, Rivesaltes.
Yes, Rivesaltes. They told my parents that that would be a more conducive to a camp that had families with children, and my parents opted to take that offer and go there. One thing I didn't explain very well, when we went into our barracks in Gurs, they were all of wood construction, with on the sides there were high windows that were, some of the windows were broken, the roofs were leaking, and we were sleeping on straw. There were no beds in there. There were no mattresses in there, just straw. We were in Gurs for 2 years before we had an offer to go to this other camp.
And the irony of this is that the official word was they were transferring families because the second camp was supposedly more conducive to children. Mm-hmm. And actually the conditions were worse, weren't they?
Yes.
How were the conditions?
Well, instead of a wood barracks, these were concrete block barracks. The sleeping conditions were better, actually, because they had cubicles, wooden cubicles that families, the entire family was in one cubicle. So the three of us, my mother, my sister, and I, were in a lower cubicle. These cubicles were about 8 feet deep, about 6 feet wide, and 4 feet high. And there was a cubicle above us also, so there was another family that had to climb over us to get to their place. There were no mattresses in there, but it was different from sleeping on hay.
Ultimately, the Quaker community somehow was able to make contact with your mother and father?
No. The Quaker community, the Quakers came to France to try to free some of the Jewish children in some of the concentration camps. We don't know how or what they did to make that happen. Mm-hmm. That was never made clear, and no one's ever been able to explain that to me.
But they helped you move on to an orphanage.
Oh, absolutely.
How did that happen?
Well, there were 20 children that were allowed to leave Rivesaltes out of probably 1,000. And my parents were given the option to have us leave. My mother was just skin and bones. She was in poor health. She knew she wasn't going to make it. My father was a little better than that. They insisted that we leave, and I was 5.5 years old at the time. I didn't want to leave. I was old enough to know that we're leaving my parents. I remember my sister and my mother crying profusely, because my mother was very sick by that time. As a matter of fact, my mother, when we found out afterwards that 2 weeks after we left my parents in Riversaltis, they were put on a train to Auschwitz. And my mother died on the train, and my father was put to death in Auschwitz within a few days after he arrived there.
Yes.
In the gas chambers there.
You're how many years of age?
5.5.
5.5. You're starting to recall by image now.
Oh yes.
You have images.
Oh yes. And I'll tell you, it's strange, and I've always asked myself that question: do I really remember this, or is this something that I'm just putting into words from the diary that my sister wrote? But I remember the first camp when I was only 3.5 years old, because I remember we had a lot of rats. And I was very scared of rats. And I think if most of us, if something terrible happens in your life, even at a young age, I think at least I did anyway, a lot of people would remember some of that. I don't remember the train ride. I don't remember being on a train.
But you remember the conditions.
I remember the conditions, exactly. I remember the guard at the end of the door with a machine gun and a German Shepherd dog that prevented us from leaving the barracks all day long. We were confined to barracks all day.
Isn't Doctor doing a remarkable job of recalling this chapter in history? Really? All right, you're in the orphanage now in France.
Right.
What is the orphanage like?
The Quakers took us in a truck, and a back-ended truck that was open, covered with straw. And they told us that we had to stay close to the cab of the truck, because the Germans would sometimes stop the truck, stop them and look for Jews being transported.
So you're in hiding.
Oh yes. Yeah, they took pitchforks and went through the straw.
How close did they come?
They came close to my sister. They didn't come close to me.
Wow.
But no, we made it. They took us to this orphanage, children's home, and my sister actually worked taking care of some other children, young children, because she was older. She was now 13 years old, and she of course always took care of me.
She earned some money in doing this.
They gave her 100 marks if she would do this. She took care of 8 children, and they gave us a large room.
What did she do with the money she earned?
She said, I don't want the money, but if you can get me some yarn and some knitting needles, I'd like to make some sweaters and scarves and hats for the children so that they can be warm in the wintertime, which is coming up. So that's what she did with, there was nothing to do with money anyway.
And ultimately, you had family, extended family in Switzerland, who were able to make contact with the French underground.
My extended family lived in the Italian sector of Switzerland, which is Lugano. They had a large number of department stores. They were very well to do. And during the war, they helped the French underground. They gave them money to buy weapons, they gave them clothing, and they gave them food. And for years and years, they heard from the Red Cross that we were freed, but they didn't know where we were. So they called the underground in and said, I've been helping you for all these years. I want you to do something for me now. I have a niece and nephew somewhere in France, probably in an orphanage. I want you to find them. and bring them to me. And they did. It took them 6 months to find us. And during the 6 months, we stayed at the orphanage. We didn't know this was happening. We had no idea. So we stayed at the orphanage. The Germans would come to the orphanage and take all of our food. So we were always still hungry.
They would take the food from the kids?
Oh, sure.
Wow.
Sure.
Wow.
They always did that. And they came probably twice a day to do that. So we were always very hungry. My sister took the children, our 8 children, and myself, out every day into the fields, and she noticed that cows were eating grass. So she thought, you know what? She said, I'm going to try eating grass tomorrow. And I said, you better not. I don't think that's going to be good for you. And I was 6 years old now. And she says, I said, can I try it? She says, no, not until I try it first. So she tried some grass, and she didn't have any indigestion from it or anything like that. And then the next day she took some dandelion leaves, and not the stem, the milk is in, but just the leaves themselves, and she ate those, and she didn't have any problems with that. So then we started, all of us, the children, started eating grass and dandelion leaves. And it wasn't delicious, but it kept us alive.
But the French underground made contact with you, and you had a chance to move on.
The French underground took us from the home, the orphanage, to a farm near the Swiss border in France. And the husband and wife who ran the farm worked with the underground.
Brave people.
Very faithfully. They hid a lot of Jewish children and Jewish adults who had no place to go. They had a cellar. They had a stairs that went down, and then a trap door that went over that. And then she had a large rug that went on top of that, and then she had a sewing machine. She did a lot of sewing, so she had a sewing machine. She had that. The German patrols would come there all the time looking for food. This is a farm. They grow food. So they would always take their food, and they would come in the house, and they would say, "Are you hiding any Jews?"
Wow.
And of course, no. Of course we're not hiding Jews. Why would you think we're hiding Jews? So, and they pounded with their rifles a little bit once in a while, and never found us. We were down there all day long because of the patrols coming and searching. But at night they let us come upstairs, and we were able to eat with them, and we started eating food, which we couldn't keep down. Our digestive systems had just stopped working. Everything that we ate came back out. So we did drink. They gave us some milk to drink, and whatever they could think of that we could keep down.
One day you had a opportunity to head for the border, and you
Yep.
had family waiting on the other side.
Yes, my aunt and uncle in Switzerland knew where we were now, through the underground. They made arrangements. Their daughter lived in Geneva, which is in the French sector of Switzerland, and with her husband, who was an attorney. They drew up all the papers. They got the visas for us to stay in Switzerland for 3 years. The husband and wife put us on their bicycles one night when all the arrangements were made. Took us to the border, which was about 5 kilometers from where the farm was, which is maybe 3 miles or something like that. So I was on the back of the husband's bike, and my sister was on the back of the wife's bicycle.
This is an incredible scene. I mean, it really does read like a movie.
And they took us to the border, and there were French guards and Swiss guards, and then between them there was like a moat, a concrete moat that had some water in it. And the French took us, carried us into the moat, And the Swiss guards took us out of the moat on the other side. My niece and nephew were over there with envelopes of money. They handed out the money to the guards, and we were now in Switzerland and safe.
You're free.
We're free. The problem was we still couldn't eat. And they put us in the hospital for about 6 weeks. We were on feeding tubes, and until our digestive systems, enzymes started working again, and then we were able to function.
You are how many years old at this point when you crossed the border?
This is 6 years old.
You're 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You're enrolled in school. You learned a number of languages between the age of 6 and 9, didn't you?
I did.
What did you learn?
I learned, well, in Switzerland, because it's divided into 4 different sectors. So if you want to go into the Italian sector, you have to speak some Italian. You go in the French sector, you need to speak some French. That has changed now, 50, 60 years later, 70 years later, everybody speaks English. But at that time, it was different. So I learned, of course I spoke German fluently, but I also spoke Swiss German, and which was very different. We had a lady
very
that once,
challenging.
Yes. Yeah. It's like a dialect, but there are a lot of words that they say that I didn't understand until she kind of explained it to me, what it was, what it meant.
And after 3 years in Switzerland, you had to make a decision to stay or move on somewhere else, right?
Yes. Our visas ran out. My aunt and uncle and my family in Switzerland wanted us to stay there. They were going to make us citizens of Switzerland. My aunt and uncle here in Milwaukee wanted us to come here because they felt that there was a better life for us here.
And Trudy, your Aunt Trudy was a remarkable woman.
She was. If anybody could be your mother again, it was her. The aunt or anybody can't really replace your biological mother or father, but she came very close to it, as close as anyone could, and she did. She was wonderful. She was great.
So your Aunt Trudy and your Uncle Max in
Mm-hmm.
Milwaukee made arrangements for you to join them in Milwaukee, but you had a heck of a flight to get here. As a matter of fact, you missed your first flight, and thank the Lord you did. Tell us what happened.
Well, we were in Geneva, and my cousin bought 2 airline tickets for us, TWA, and there was bad weather. So they grounded the planes. They were not flying overseas, and we stayed with them another night. And then the next day, we were supposed to go back to the airport and get that flight and fly over. Well, because they had stopped the other flight the day before, they had 2 flights going to New York on that day. One was very early in the morning, which we didn't know anything about, and then one was later in the day. We took the one later in the day because we couldn't get to the airport in time anyway. Well, that storm that grounded the planes the day before caused that first plane to crash.
You would have been on that plane.
I would have been on that flight. This was in Newfoundland, where they sometimes have some very bad storms over there. And that's where we were supposed to land to refuel and then go to New York from there. So, and my sister was very, very apprehensive about going on an airplane. She had never been on one.
Yeah.
And she wanted to go on a ship. But my aunt and uncle said, no, you're going on an airplane that's faster, this and that. And anyway, so
So February 9th, 1947, you arrive in Milwaukee. You're 9 years old.
In January of 1947, right. And we stayed with some cousins in New York for about 4 weeks. And then we took a train and came to Milwaukee.
Marquette University undergraduate work, go on to dental school, ROTC, served in the armed forces, and there was a very important blind date, which we must not forget to talk about.
Oh, yes.
57 years ago? Longer than that.
57 years. Well, we've been married
Been
57
married, you and
years.
Carol been married
This was, let's
57
say,
years.
58 years ago.
Tell us about your blind date.
Well, we had a dental fraternity, a Jewish dental fraternity at Marquette. That once a year they hosted a dinner dance for the staff and for the students, and they paid for it. We didn't have any money, so this was in Browns Lake. I can't think of the name of the resort anymore. But anyway, I was supposed to go with a young lady that I had been dating, and her grandmother died. So she called me and she said, I don't feel right celebrating on a week after my grandmother died. I said, no, I totally understand that. I don't want you to do that. So a friend of mine knew a lot of people, or his cousin knew a lot of people, and he gave me Carol's name and telephone number. It was Fleischman at the time, and we met a couple times and went out for coffee and ice cream, whatever, in the evening. And
Carol's smiling. She likes this part of the story. Carol, 57 years later, you're still the other woman.
So it was great. It was great. It was anyway. So we went together for about a year, and then it was in my between my junior and my senior year. No, between my sophomore and my junior year. She wanted to get married. It was her. She wanted to get married. I wanted to wait. I was going to be really.
Well, you were a night auditor at a local hotel, correct?
Right.
Working your way through dental school.
Right, but it was just I just didn't feel as though I was ready as far as monetarily ready. I was ready in every other way to get married.
Right.
But she convinced me that between the two of us we could handle it, and she was right. She's always right.
And you've been blessed with 4 children, 12 grandchildren. Many of them are here today.
Yes,
you are blessed. You are blessed.
I am blessed. I am blessed with each and every one of you and all of my friends also. Thank you for being here today.
It really, really. What pulled you through this?
My sister was a very strong.
She was an angel.
She was an angel. I mean, she would give you the shirt off her back, and she always did. She always did that. And she was just, and after she passed away, I mean, she died in 1975 of ovarian cancer after suffering for 2 years with it. But I've never, a day doesn't go by when I don't think about her. She was that strong an influence on me. She took me from when I was 5 years old and raised me until we got to Milwaukee. And then my aunt kind of took over and she got married and, she had her own family. But we were always very close, always. And it was she was a wonderful person.
When you're alone and the room is quiet,
Mm-hmm.
and you're thinking,
I usually fall asleep.
I just turned 65, me too. It's really tough, isn't it? Especially when your wife walks in and catches you sleeping. What kind of memories come back?
I don't think about my early childhood as much since I've been talking, since I've been on the circuit, telling other people my story. Maybe that's good. I guess it's good. It's always hard for me to do this. I mean, it's always hard for me to even just go to a class and do it. But I do it because I think it's important that these kids know what happened, that they remember, they need to be reminded, and I guess I've been chosen to do a little bit of it.
When you turn on the evening news and you see supremacy and hatred rising again on the streets of America, and they say, well, it's not the same, it's different, it's political, it's this, it's that. What scares you about it?
I'm scared of my grandchildren. I'm scared of my children are mature enough they can handle these things. My grandchildren I'm thinking of. I really am. It's very hard. It's very hard to imagine. And my aunt, before she died, she asked me two things. Number one, don't ever go back to Germany, which I did. And the other thing she said was, don't ever forget that what happened in Germany can happen here. And I disagreed with her, but now I'm beginning to have my second thoughts about that.
What is making you think that way?
The hatred in this country.
Where does that come from?
I don't know. I don't know. We have so much to be thankful for, and yet nobody is happy. They're just, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. The people that have want more. The people that don't have want what the people that have want. And there's constantly, I don't know.
You not only survived, but for future generations of your family have survived.
Yes.
And when you look in the eyes of your children and your grandchildren, what do you see?
I'm happy. I see success. I see people that are happy, that are content. Is there a better answer?
If you had an opportunity to share a moment with your mother or father now about how you survived and where you are in life, what would you tell them?
I think I would say that my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren are here in spite of everything that you did or tried to do to kill all the Jews so there wouldn't be any future generations. I feel good about that. I feel good about that.
Hitler didn't win.
No, he didn't win. We won.
You did. You have been a wonderful and a very gracious guest, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is great. Yes, sir.